Welcome to Warrior Stories. My name is Susanna Clark Taylor. Today is January 18th, 2023, and my guest today is Tammy Risinger from Virginia. Hi, Tammy.
Hi,
How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So I always like to say how I know my guests. And Tammy, you and I met, I was trying to figure out how many years because it's based upon the ages of our sons. So both of our boys started in the same kindergarten class at the same elementary school 7, 8 years ago at this point.
Yeah.
So that's how we know each other. And I loved that mom group. When our kids would get together and we'd take them to the park, we'd attend each other's birthday parties or whatever. And I always looked forward to seeing that particular group of moms. You know, my family has since moved away from that area, so I don't run into a lot of you anymore. And it's just been really fun for me to reconnect with you and to have you come on Warrior Stories. So thank you for coming.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for asking me.
Absolutely. Okay, so Tammy, I have had so many conversations with people that have come on Warrior Stories about the frustrations that particularly parents of children with disabilities run into when we're trying to get our children the things that they need, right? Especially in the educational space. And there's oftentimes a lot of turmoil that exists in the IEP process. And so I've had a lot of people come on Warrior Stories and we've talked about that angst and that heartache and the stress and everything else. And at the back of my mind, I have, at the same time as I've been having these conversations, I've been very aware that behind the educators or the administrators or even the doctors or the therapists that sometimes parents of children with disabilities are frustrated with, there are people with really good hearts who went into those particular professions with good intent, who want to serve this population. And inevitably, though, sometimes there's this point of contention between parents of children with disabilities and the professionals working with those kids. But I am very aware that no one goes into that profession without having an enormous heart. And so I was particularly excited to have you come on Warrior Stories because you fall into that unique category of an individual who wears both hats. You are the mother of a child with disabilities, and you are also a special education teacher. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today because I think you have a unique perspective and a lot to offer. And I'm excited to learn from you and to have you share your wisdom with everyone. So I'm really
Thanks.
excited that you're here. But starting out, why don't we go back and have you tell us about the day that changed your life forever in regard to your son, Mitchell?
Okay. And with Mitchell's, it's very different because it was kind of in stages. Mitchell was born at 27 weeks. And so he was a 1 pound, 10 ounce baby. And when Mitchell was born, we were told he only had a 5% chance of living. So little Stinker's a fighter.
Right.
And he beat all the odds. But he did have a grade 4 brain bleed, which they say is equivalent to, I mean, it's basically a stroke.
Mhm.
And so that caused some brain damage. And then he had, of course, lack of oxygen. So we kind of knew at that point that Mitchell's life would be different, that there
Right.
would be some type of disability. As he got older, different things started to progress. But he also had retinopathy of prematurity. So his retinas were detaching. That's why he was still in NICU. He was in NICU for 3 months.
Wow.
He actually came home the week of his due date.
Wow.
So, yeah, so we knew there would be vision issues there. So we brought him home. And so, because at that point, he was able to start getting services before he was a year old through the school system. So, we've always had some type of IEP and special ed service with Mitchell. And so, then, of course, he didn't start meeting his milestones. And they told us, with prematurity, you have to subtract the months that he was premature, and then but he still wasn't reaching them, so we knew there was more there.
Right.
And then we did get the diagnosis somewhere. I mean, he's 36 now, so remember back all these years, that he did have the cerebral palsy. And then with his vision, the first eye doctor only did the cryotherapy surgery on one eye, not the other. And so by the time we went for the second opinion, who was a fabulous eye doctor, she was his eye doctor then until he was 16. She was like, they should have done both. They were doing experimental. Didn't tell you they were doing experimental. So then he developed glaucoma in his left eye and then ended up having to remove the lens when he was 16 months old. And then the glaucoma developed again when he was 4, and they ended up having to remove the eye at that point because it was what they call a dead eye, and his face wouldn't form correctly. So he's had a prosthetic eye on his left since he was 4. So then we knew definitely there was the blindness issue there.
Right.
Because even his, what we call his good eye, his right eye is like 2200. So it's still, legally blind. Amazing that he functions as well as he does. He's learned to totally compensate. Since he does have the cerebral palsy, he walks with a forearm crutch, and he uses that to probe like you would,
Okay.
so it's amazing the things he does. So all of that being said, pretty much from birth with Mitchell, we knew that there would be something, but each year until he was probably about 12, there was always something new that would come up with Mitchell. He has hydrocephalus, so he had a shunt put in when he was 9 months old, had it revised at 12, and amazingly has never had to have it revised again, which is
Wow.
pretty much unheard of. So yeah, something different with him all the time, but that was kind of where it started. We've just gone with it since then. So,
Right. Tell us what you have learned about, because everything that you've just described, I mean, so many parents of children with disabilities can relate to. And it's one thing to talk about it all these years later and be
right.
very matter of fact about it, but that isn't how any parent feels while they're in the middle of it.
No, you grieve. You go through a grieving process,
Right.
a realization that my child's life is not going to be what you had envisioned. Why, everybody, every woman, and even the men, the dads, while you're pregnant, you have these visions of
Yeah.
what your child's life is going to be like, what you're going to do with your child. And like, I think about Stephen, my husband, as a dad, and you had a son, you always envisioned sports or teaching them to drive or all of those things. You're going to, at some point, you grieve that loss because
Yeah.
it is a loss.
It
You're
is.
losing that reality of what it was going to be and having to come to terms with what are we going to do now?
Right.
And going through that process, you either crumble or you're like, okay, we've got to shift gears and where are we going to go? And still look at the positives that you can do. And depending on, having taught special ed and seeing the different levels of disabilities there are and what your child is able to do, what their future is going to look like. And you want them to have a future. You want them to have something that they're productive with and that makes them happy and brings them joy.
Why don't we jump to that question? Because I wanted you to kind of tell us about Mitchell's life now. Like, what does his life look like now that he's an adult? And what are some of the meaningful experiences he's been able to have in adulthood?
One of the reasons we even moved to where we are now, because we lived in Tennessee and also we lived outside of Memphis, not the best place to live if you have a child with a disability. There's very limited services. So that was one reason why we came to Virginia, because we knew there were more services in this area. And Stephen's job was where he had something he could transfer to here. So, because Mitchell had already graduated high school, and where we were, they didn't have a transition program set up to where, okay, you graduated, let's transition into job skills. It was like he graduated and boom, you're on your own again. And so Mitchell did go back to Texas and stayed with our family there for a couple of years and took some classes at a junior college there. He took some technology courses. And then we moved up here and we got with a program here called DARS.
Mm-hmm.
And they set him up with a job coach and they found a job for him. He actually now has 2 jobs. So he works in 2 different restaurants here. And they kind of made a job for Mitchell because Mitchell falls through the cracks with some of his abilities. Mitchell is fabulous with technology. He's fabulous with people. But as he's gotten older, his cerebral palsy has manifested differently. His speech is a little more delayed now. And with the cerebral palsy and walks with the forearm crutch, it limits him on what he can do physically
Sure.
as far as moving things, picking things up. So they created a job for Mitchell, and Mitchell rolls their silverware and helps wipe down the tables and like wipe down the high chairs in the restaurant. So that's what he does in 2 different restaurants. He worked 2 days a week at one and 1 day a week at the other, and he's going to pick up another day there. And so he loves that. He enjoys that, and he sets up his own transportation. They pick him up at the house, take him to work, bring him back.
Awesome.
He can also set that up to go. He goes to the mall or to the movies, does things that he enjoys.
Right.
And we found, thank goodness for ATM cards because he doesn't have to worry about counting out money, counting out his change. So he
Right.
can go to those, use his debit card, totally able to function all of that. And then through DARS. He also started working with the ARC of Loudon here.
Uh-huh.
And he was asked to help do presentations with them through two programs they have. One is Pathways to the Community, where he also talks to businesses and people in the community. They hold trainings for them to where Mitchell tells them about his job or about opportunities where they can bring in and help people,
Mhm.
or people with disabilities can come in and help at their programs or their businesses. But he also through that works with other individuals with disabilities, maybe kids that are leaving high school and coming into their jobs. He helps train them on the transportation system,
Cool.
how to go purchase their card that they have to punch when they take a ride, how to catch a bus and transfer to another bus, how to look at the schedule. So he trains them on, in fact, he's doing that next Tuesday. He texted me yesterday and he's like, Mom, I'm not going to be home next Tuesday. I'm doing a bus training. Cool.
Awesome.
Then they also have one that's called Pathways to Justice, where he works with the ARC of Loudon and the Sheriff's Department, and they train first responders on how to work with people with disabilities, how to give them pause to speak. And in both the programs, Mitchell shows them how he, in his phone in the notes section, he has different things programmed in there, like, like my name is Mitchell, or his address, or I'm trying to get to wherever,
Right.
so that he can show that, because when he gets anxious or nervous, his speech gets even more delayed and a
Right.
stutter. And so he can pull that up and show them. And so it teaches the first responders that if somebody's using their phone and if they have a visible disability, you can understand that. But, we have a lot of people, our adults with autism or different
Mhm.
things that, visibly you can't
You
tell
can't
there's
tell.
a
Yep.
disability.
Hmm.
But if you see that they're on their phone, give them a chance to pull that up. And so he does those two programs. And there's an organization here called Tree of Life, and they have proms for adults with disability. They have Christmas dances and Christmas programs. They have a puppet group to where Mitchell and some of his other friends with disabilities, they put on puppet programs at different times of the year. They go to some of the elderly homes and
Right.
different places, and they do the program. So he does all of those things. And we're very fortunate that in this area there are that many different organizations and programs in our community that offer a social life for our adults with disabilities.
Right. And that is what is so beautiful to me because all any of us want is to have a meaningful life.
Right.
And it sounds to me like here in this area, Mitchell has been able to find the programs and the organizations that allow him to be involved, that allow him to have as much autonomy as he possibly can. Because again,
Right.
all any of us want is that sense of self and that sense of autonomy and to build himself a meaningful life. And I just think that's so beautiful.
Yeah, and he loves it. I get tickled. He gets so involved, and you try to like, okay, he's an adult now. I need to step back and give him that little space.
Mhm.
Um, I had to ask him the specific name of the programs because he does all of this on his own. I was like, what is the name of that?
Right. Which
And
is so great because that's no
yes,
different than a mom of any other adult who gets
yes,
involved in their own life and you might not know everything that your adult child does at work or does, in their free time and like that's totally normal. So I love
yes,
that he's able to be independent enough that you had to ask him what the names of the
yes.
programs were.
And they're amazing programs. A couple of years, actually, it was right before COVID, before everything shut down. They had at the Xerox Training Center here, it's huge. They had a big seminar, and they had him come, and they did the Pathways to Justice. But I mean, there was people from all over the state that came. Different agencies came, and they asked us if we wanted to come. And so Stephen and I went, and even my supervisor at my job, I've told her about it. She goes, "Oh, I'm going to go watch too." So she came,
Awesome.
and to see him up there just so comfortably, doing all of this, it was wonderful. It makes you happy to see that all the struggles, all the therapies, all the schooling, all the everything you do for all those years did lead him to a place to where he was feeling like he was giving back.
Right, exactly. And not always being the one to receive, but being able to
Right.
give also. So, speaking of giving, I'm hoping you will tell us about your journey and the decision that you made to become a special education teacher. Because, as much as I love my daughter and I'm so grateful that she is who she is, like that's something I say to her often is that I'm so grateful you're the you that you are. Like I don't want her to be any different than who she is. Being her mother comes with a lot of challenges. I love working in this space. I love advocacy for the disability community. I love this work. I don't know that I could be a special education teacher. And I just think it takes a very special person to live that life at home, but then to also want that to be your profession as well. So I'm hoping that you'll share with us your journey of becoming a special education teacher, what made you decide to do it, and just tell us about that part of your life.
It wasn't initially what I thought I would start out doing at
Right.
all. And so, kind of back up a little bit, and I don't mind sharing this. Stephen and I were actually in high school when we had Mitchell, a miracle in of itself that, and I will say this to anybody that's listening as parents, take care of your mental health and take care of your marriage if it means that much to you, because
Yeah.
being a parent of a special needs child can cause so much strife between that
Yeah.
can become an issue. And it has at times. I'm not going to say it's been,
Sure.
36 years of wonderful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we started off in high school together when we had Mitchell. And so then we went off to college, and, Stephen's doing his degree. And initially I was going to go to law school, but we knew at that point there was no way that was going to happen, because at that point Mitchell was going through all the surgeries. And by the time he was 12, he'd had like 25 surgeries. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to get an education degree because the hours work great. And I do love working with kids.
Mm-hmm.
And as Mitchell got closer to school age, I thought, I need to know what all this means. What does an IEP mean? So that's how I got into getting a special ed degree. And I initially got into it going, well, I'll get my elementary ed degree, but I'll take these special ed classes so that I'll know what to do with Mitchell. I'm not going to teach that, but I'll know what to do.
Right.
But no, once you have that degree, guess what? That's
Yeah,
what you're teaching.
that's right.
But I was fortunate enough that my first 20 something years of teaching was I started teaching in 92. So that was back when we had the old, what I call old school resource classrooms, where the students that, just had like specific learning disabilities that are a grade level or two behind, they would come to me for reading, language, and math. And then they would go back to their gen ed classroom for everything else. Then as we got into the special ed system, got into what they call co-teaching,
Mhm.
where the resource teacher no longer pulled the kids, but went into the classroom and co-taught with the classroom teacher. I did that for several years. That I think was good because it wasn't so much of the more involved disabilities. I could do the teaching of the educational part of it. And then I got into teaching where we are now into the multiple disabilities classroom. And that is more of the physical disabilities, the more severe cognitive disabilities. I
Right.
think had I done that when Mitchell was younger, my burnout would have been quick.
Sure. Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and I did that for several years, and that's kind of my progression. Now I'm not even in the classroom. I'm what they call a consulting teacher. I pretty much coach the teachers in those classrooms now. And
Awesome.
I have all of our MD classrooms in our district. So I have 16 multiple disability teachers that I go in and coach, and
Right.
one autism teacher and one intellectual disability teacher. So I have 18 teachers that I coach now,
Awesome.
which again, from both sides of the perspective, I'm able to tell them, you're doing a great job as a teacher. Or if they start complaining with a parent, there's a parent that say, okay, let's stop and look at the parent point of view too,
Right.
and see where they're coming from. So I can give both sides. And I remember doing that as a teacher. I'd have to say, okay, I'm the teacher here, but I could have that conversation with the parents when I've been in your shoes. I
Yep.
understand where you are. But then if I would go into one of Mitchell's IEP meetings, I'd have to think, okay, I'm the parent this time. I'm not the one sitting here going, this is what we're, but I could also say, this is what we're going to do. So,
Right. Right. Absolutely.
and I've had to do that a few times. I'm like, no, that's not what we're going to do with Mitchell. We're going to do this.
Right. And I love that in your position now, you are uniquely qualified to do that training with the special education teachers, because not only do you have years of experience in a variety of kinds of special ed positions, but you also carry that experience of being the mother of a child with disability. So that it's just such a unique intersection between what sometimes can be two opposite sides of a
Right.
situation. And I just think that's fantastic. That perspective you have is so beneficial for you to share with other people and for other people to learn from you, because it's just, I think it's unique, but it's also, it's just so invaluable to have somebody with all of that
Thank
perspective.
you. It does help because you have teachers, especially when I got into the MD program, that don't know you can set a little bit higher standard.
Mhm.
Yes, set those ceilings, set those goals. Don't
Right.
just think, well, because they can't do X, Y, and Z,
Right.
we're not going to, work on this or work on certain things. And also, as a parent, I wanted those teachers to know, don't set
Limit.
limits on what Mitchell can do.
Mhm.
We're going to
Just
push him, so you push him too,
right. Presume
and
competence, right?
yes, presume competence. Yes, I have a T-shirt that says that. Presume competence. I love
I
it.
love it. I love it. Absolutely. So, in that vein, have you had experiences in IEP meetings as an educator where a parent was frustrated with either you or the administrators in that process? And how did that feel from an educator's perspective? Because again, I talk so much with other parents of children with disabilities, and I do sometimes feel like we fall into this little pit of frustration where we just talk about, oh, this or that is so frustrating. But again, the people who are going into special education as a profession, they have some of the biggest hearts of anyone I know and are really honestly trying to do what's absolutely best for those children. But even as they do that, sometimes parents are still really frustrated. So I'm curious from your perspective, what has that felt like for you being in that situation where you weren't able to satisfy maybe what a parent wanted, and just dealing with that frustration from an educator's perspective? What
Yeah,
has that felt like?
I have to say I've been very fortunate that I really haven't had that many issues with parents, especially when I was teaching in more of the resource classroom. In fact, each time I left, I had parents go, "Do you really have to leave? Can't you just stay here? Can't they go without you?" Which that makes me feel good because they
Yeah,
knew that I truly cared about their child and I truly
right.
cared about their child's education. The one main incident I can think of was I had a student who was having a lot of behavioral issues, and she's one of my nonverbal kiddos. Is when I started teaching MD. Most of the time, if there is a behavioral issue, they're communicating something. There's a reason for that. So to work through that, we want to do what we call a functional behavior assessment. And so wanted to go that route with the student. Met with the mom agreed. We did that part and we were coming back to me. And the dad came to that meeting. He'd never come before and he was just furious. My
Mm,
child doesn't have behaviors, don't you understand? And he used the R word.
right.
I hate that word. He goes, "Don't you understand? My daughter is," I
Mm,
won't even say it, tell him the story because I hate that word. I hate it. And I just was flabbergasted. I was like, how could you even say that about your own child? How can you use that word? And he's like, refusing. I'm like, that's fine. It's your right as a parent to refuse this. We won't do this. And so
mm,
we didn't go that route. And what I was going to work with the student on in the classroom, I could do anyway, because I could still work through teaching the communication skills and find the reason for the behaviors. But I wanted it in her file so that if she moved classrooms, another teacher would know, oh, this is what they were working on. So that was kind of the main situation there. And from that point on, the relationship with the parent was different.
mhm.
And that's really out of my 28 years of doing this, that's really the only real one issue that I can think of, as far as in a meeting. And it wasn't necessarily an IEP meeting, but it was a meeting to work on the FBA. If there's ever been a time in an IEP meeting where the parent questioned a goal or wanted a different goal in there, we would talk it through. And my point is, if the parent wants to work on it, why not? Let's give it a shot. Put it
Right.
in there. We can take the data, we can see how it goes. It may work, it may not work, but then we can talk about it. So my big thing is I always want there to be open communication between the parent and the teacher. And usually I find out if you have that open communication, you're not going to have as many issues when it comes to the IEP meeting. Unfortunately, a lot of times you have educators that feel like they're tied to, well, we can't talk about this or we can't talk about that. And granted, I tell my teachers, don't do a lot of texting on the phone, don't do a lot of emailing, talk in person, meet and talk. And that way you have a more human connection.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, there's a couple of thoughts there. One has to do with empathy, just the empathy that needs to be exchanged in both directions between educators and parents. It's hard in the situation you just described because sometimes when parents, have a child and they, like you said before, have all of these hopes and dreams, and then they learn that their child is going to have all of these difficulties. If the parents in their own backgrounds have had experiences where they were taught, either on purpose or not on purpose, that there was something wrong with people who were different, they have to come to terms with their own prejudice as they learn to love their own child with
Right.
disabilities. And for some people, that's a hard hurdle to get over. We can judge that person and say, you should be a better person than that, or not have those feelings toward your own child. Or we can offer that person empathy and say they're doing the best that they can.
And that's how I felt with this dad. I think he felt like we were saying his child was bad or
Right,
she was being bad. And
right,
that wasn't it at all. He wasn't able to hear us because he had already put that wall up and wasn't
right,
wanting to, at that point, wasn't able to come to that
right.
at during the meeting. And so I was like, and instead of going round and round, we just listened. We're like, okay.
Mhm.
But I think that's what he thought we were saying, and that wasn't what we were saying. We're like, no.
Right. And it sounds like that you were doing exactly what needs to happen in that space is everyone assuming that the other people are coming from a good place, that people are legitimately doing the best they know how to do and offer empathy in that space. As long as behavior from the adults is not abusive to the other adults or harmful to
Right.
the other, or more importantly, harmful, inadvertently harmful to the child.
The
Because
child.
sometimes the way parents approach things can be detrimental to the child's
Yes.
development. And so there needs to be some very specific education in that regard.
Right.
But for the most part, we're all doing the best that we can. And if we can offer each other that empathy in that space, I think that's how we create an environment where the child can thrive. And like
Exactly.
you said, it's a partnership between the educators and the parents to help elevate the education of that child. So,
I think we forget the word team in IEP team. It is
yeah.
a team. It's not one against the other. It is a
Mhm.
team. And I think that gets lost a lot of times.
Yeah, absolutely. What have you learned about the importance of self-care for parents of children with disabilities?
Self care is so important. I think you have to take that time for your mental health as well, because it can be all consuming,
Right.
especially when they're younger and you're going through the gazillion doctor's appointments. And because I felt like as Mitchell got older, those kind of got less and less because we got to a point to where there was more stability in whatever
Mhm.
medical conditions he had or physical needs or whatever. So, but he was younger, it was like every, 3 months, 6 month doctor's appointments. There were surgeries. He's had eye surgeries, ear surgeries, leg surgeries, his shunt. You get very consumed in that, and that becomes your world. And you have to have a break from that. You have to find, nowadays, and like I was telling you before, when Mitchell was little, we didn't have the waivers for in home health care, to where they could come in. And so we didn't have that when Mitchell was little. But fortunately, we lived close to our families, our parents. We were 2 hours away when we were in college, and then we moved back to a town 30 minutes from our hometown. So when Mitchell up into the point of he was, I guess we moved to Memphis when he was 14.
Mhm.
So from birth to 14, we were close to family.
Mhm.
And so my mother helped a lot. And so you just need to make sure you take that time to have a date night.
Yeah.
At least once a month, have a date night. If you're a single mom, find somebody that can watch them for a while and go get your nails done, go get your hair done, go get a cup of coffee, whatever. But you've got to have that time to be able to disconnect from the world of special needs
Mhm. It's
because you need that.
Yeah, it's not like other scenarios where you might run into something really difficult and you just have to work through it. When you have a child with significant and permanent disabilities,
Right.
it's never going to end.
No.
There's not, let's get through it and then life can return to
Yeah.
normal. This is your new normal.
Yeah. And I never dreamed and didn't think long term that, when Mitchell was little, that at 36, he's still going to be at home with us.
Yeah.
And yeah, he does a lot of stuff independently. We talked about it. He's got his own things, but there are still those needs that he needs us for. There's still those things that we have to help with. There's still those times that we have to guide him and help him through things. That's not at the level it was when he was little,
Right.
but it's still there.
Yeah.
So we even find that now. I mean, Steve and I look at each other and go, caregiver fatigue it's real. When people hear that, they think of as adults taking care of their elderly parents. No, it's still it's adults taking care of their adult children, their young children with disabilities that they
Mhm.
rely on you for everything, for feeding, for changing, for movement, for everything. And if you don't have a way to disconnect from that for even an hour every so often, you are worn down and you don't realize it until it's too late sometimes. So you need to take the time to, find somebody that you can rely on, that you can take an hour, or if you're fortunate enough, somebody that can watch them for a weekend so you can get away for a whole weekend. And that's hard to do for a lot of people. Um, and I know here we're fortunate enough to have a place that you can, Jill's house,
Right. Uh-huh.
It's fabulous. That is the most wonderful thing I'd ever heard of. I'd never heard of that till we moved here. And I'm like, what a fabulous resource that is for parents, to where they do have all the staff that is trained, and your child can stay there for a weekend if you're comfortable enough with that. And you can have a weekend, especially if they're siblings,
Yeah.
that you can do something with the siblings that where they can feel like they're a focus for a while. You don't want the siblings to start feeling like their sibling with a disability is a burden to the family. You don't ever want them to get to that.
Right.
You want them to feel like that, we can all have fun, but there are times that, yeah, you can go do something and not have that there as well. Not have the, do we have to, find somewhere that's got all the handicap accessible stuff,
Right.
or make sure we take breaks for different things that they can have a time to just do with them as well.
Right. Because, you have Mitchell, who's an adult, but you also have a 13-year-old son lived his whole life with a big brother who has disabilities that still lives in the home, and they love each other to death, right?
Yes.
But
Yes.
it's hard. And I know how that is. I have two older children and they adore their little sister so much. But because of Isabel's care, I can't be as attentive to my older kids. And so when I have some time where someone else is caring for Isabel and I can really just focus on my older kids, it makes all the difference in the world to my older kids. And it's not because they don't love their little sister,
No.
but it is hard. It's a unique experience that I don't understand because I didn't grow up with a sibling with a disability.
Right. Exactly.
It's a unique experience, and a difficult. And I think if you don't, and I say this being someone who doesn't actually understand. I know what it's like to be the mother of a child with disabilities. I don't know what it's like to be
Right. Yeah.
a child with disabilities, and so I've had that conversation with my older two children, that it's difficult for them, like significantly difficult, as they're growing, as they're maturing emotionally, as they're going through all of the normal things that kids go through. They have an added stress, an added burden, and an added difficulty in their life of always having to put their needs aside for their sibling. And it teaches them a great amount of patience and empathy, but it also comes with a mental health cost.
Yes.
So
Especially as they go into those teen years. Those teen years, they're difficult enough. And I know Cameron has said a couple of times, he's had a couple of kids say something to him, well, at least I don't have a brother that's like that. And I never knew that at the time. But Cameron told me later, and I was like, well, how did you deal with that? And he's like, I just tell him, Mitchell can't help that. That's how he is. That's the person he is. And I thought, what a wonderful answer Cameron has. But that has to be hard on him
hard.
too,
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
that's a whole nother juggling act of this world that we live in.
Right.
You don't think about teaching the siblings all of that. You're so caught up in this is just how we're living our life,
Right.
that you have to think, oh wow, that is something we need to talk through,
Yeah, absolutely. So as we care for our own mental health, also caring for the mental health of, siblings and everyone else.
Yes.
It is a completely life altering experience. One I'm so grateful for. I feel like my life is so much better for having this experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Right.
But it is hard. It's hard for us. It's hard for our other children. And it's hard, of course, for our kids with disabilities because they have the challenges that they face in their life. So, yeah, mental health care is so important.
Oh, it's huge. It is so important. And, with any kid, but especially in our world, because you're so wrapped up in the IEP meetings and the doctor's appointments and the therapies. And, there's just so much
Yeah.
that you forget that, what, I need to take a breather.
So you mentioned earlier that one of your favorite sayings was presumed competence and that you had it on a t-shirt.
Yep.
Something else you mentioned to me yesterday was that you also love the saying compassion over compliance. And I loved that. I hadn't heard that phrase before. So to close out our conversation, I was hoping that you could share with us why that phrase is so important to you.
That is something that is, it came actually from my position in my job. Last summer, I took a whole series of trainings because we were so trained for so long on compliance. You want the student to do this. You do this, then you can do that. And you've probably seen it with Izzy, that first then boards, first this, then that. And if the students, don't want to do it or have a, meltdown or start crying or start fussing, well, you're not going to get your sticker, so you can earn this. Again, it goes back to what I said before. Our nonverbal students don't have a way to tell us, I don't like that. I don't understand that. That's not what I want to do. I would prefer to do this. That now we're doing more compassion. If you ask them to do something and they start fussing or just refusing to do it, why? How can we work with them to find out why they don't like that? Or what would you prefer to do? Oh, you want to play with the Play-Doh right now? Great, we can play with the Play-Doh right now. We
Hmm.
don't have to do this. That's still going to be there, and build that rapport, bond with the student, have some compassion over why they're reacting the way they're reacting. What is the reason for it? They're telling us something. So have compassion for them, because a lot of our nonverbal students, we just had their daily schedule out there. And you've, like I said, you've probably seen it with Izzy, they have their visual schedule, what they're going to do, this, and this. Well, you know what? Our kids that can talk, our
Verbal, yeah.
verbal students are just, I don't want to say, our gen ed students are our neurotypical kids. They can tell us,
Yeah.
why are we doing that? I don't understand this.
Have a
I don't,
conversation. Hmm.
yes, they can't do it. So have some compassion for them. There's a reason why they're pushing the thing off the table, or they're ready. So have compassion. Look at the compassion more than just the compliance. It's
Right.
going to get done at some point. Who says it has to be done in this 30-minute block?
Right. And I think there used to be a mentality that resistance from a student toward a teacher's guidance or instruction came from a place of
Defiance.
science.
Yes.
Exactly.
It was more
Defiance.
behavioral. It's not
Mhm.
behavioral. There's a reason behind it.
It's
Yes.
communication. They are simply
Exactly.
trying to communicate something, and
Yes.
sometimes it's because there's another need that they need to have
Yes.
met before they can
Mhm.
focus. And for kids with disabilities of various kinds, different diagnoses, that's imperative to education, is meeting those other needs. And so we have to figure
Yes.
out what those needs are and figure out how to meet them
Yes.
before we can place the expectation
Yeah.
for accomplishing
Yeah.
them.
Maybe they're thirsty. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe they just want to sit and color. Maybe they just want to listen to a song. There's
Right.
a reason for it. So
Yeah.
have some compassion. Find out what it is they enjoy. Bond with them. Make that connection.
Mhm.
More so than, well, this is what I had planned for the day. You need to do X, Y, and Z.
Right. So, to close out the conversation, Tammy, is there anything else you want to share about your perspective as a special education teacher? Anything that you hope that other parents of children with disabilities might know about the process, and maybe even some encouragement? Anything that you would like to share from your experience to close out the
Oh,
conversation?
goodness. Just try to build a rapport with their student's teacher. And it's okay to ask questions.
Yep.
Most of the teachers aren't going to be offended if you ask a question. If
Yep.
they are, then maybe you need to ask the question.
Right.
you know,
Right.
make that connection, make that bond. Always assume that the teacher is coming at it from a good heart, that they do have the student's best interest in mind. If you feel like that they're wanting to do something that's too difficult, or they're doing things that are too easy, that
Mhm.
you think your student can do more, talk
Right.
to them about it. Have that open relationship. I think that's also very important. Yes, the teachers have their guidelines that they have to follow, our state standards or whatever, but
Mhm.
have that discussion. I think it's important to have a meeting before the IEP meeting.
Mhm.
It's okay to ask the teacher, hey, can we conference before the meeting so we can look at what goals we're going to work on?
Yeah.
You can do that. It's
Yeah.
okay. I think a lot of parents don't know that, yeah, we can do that.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And that the IEP is a fluid document.
It's very fluid.
So even if a decision is made in a meeting and everyone decides, okay, we are going to try XYZ, it doesn't mean that that's a permanent decision. You can try XYZ, and if it's not working, you can ask for another meeting. So
Exactly.
it's very fluid, and that's something I think not all. I know that I wasn't taught that. I had to learn
Yeah.
that through the process. That was never explained to me when I
Yeah.
started out in this process. So that's a really important thing.
Yeah, and I think I try to always make sure in my meetings, or when I was in IEP meetings, I don't do them anymore, that I did tell the parents, this is fluid.
Mhm.
If at any time you feel like we need to change a goal, relook at a goal, or if something comes up, their abilities change during the year. If you meet, and, we can always come back to the table and have another meeting. We can add a goal, drop a goal, amend the services, whatever. It's
Yep.
always fluid. And I always tried to make sure I told the parents that. And it's okay. And I think, again, back to the report, have that discussion before the meeting, because I was telling you yesterday, when Mitchell was little, we went to an IEP meeting and they blindsided me with wanting to change his placement, and nobody had talked to me about it before the meeting. I'm like, no, I stopped the meeting and I said, we will not finish this meeting. We'll reconvene, because we're not doing this. And that was one of the meetings my husband went with me. It floored him. We left. He goes, you can do that? I'm like, totally. I can totally do that.
Yeah.
This is our child. It's his education. We are part of the team. And we met again. We had a discussion, and they saw my point of view, and thank goodness, because Mitchell thrived. And I mean, it wasn't his teacher, it was one of the administrators that wanted to do that, because his teacher and I met, and she's like, Tammy, I had no idea. So you're your child's advocate,
Yep.
and keep that open rapport. The IEP is fluid, it can change at any time of the year. It doesn't have to be day one to the next year, the day before. It can be any time in between.
Right.
So
I have loved this conversation today, Tammy, and I'm so grateful that you came on Warrior Stories and you shared your wisdom because, again, you have such a unique perspective being both the mother of a child with disabilities and also a special educator. And I think the rest of us have so much to learn on both sides. Other educators have so much to learn from you, parents have so much to learn from you. So I'm just really grateful that you were
oh,
willing to
thank
share your
you.
perspective and your
Yeah,
wisdom with us today.
it's nice. It's nice to know that, like I said, Mitchell's at a point where he's sharing, but being able to share that, because there's a reason why we've been through everything we're through. And I think being able to share and where you've been, where you're going, and where other parents can learn from, it's great.
Yeah. Yeah, it absolutely is awesome. Well, thank you so much,
Oh,
Tammy.
you're welcome. Thank you.
We will keep in touch and
Yes.
chat again soon. And we need to get they're no longer kindergartners. We need to get our
Oh,
13-year-olds together again
I
because
know. I was telling Stephen at dinner last night that I was going to be doing this, and Cameron goes, Joseph. Yes.
right, right. It's like we haven't seen each other forever. I know. We definitely
Yes.
need to find some time and get the boys together.
Yes, we do. We do.
Okay. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Tammy.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
All
Yep. You're
right.
welcome. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.